Good morning or good evening everybody, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you were watching last week, you will have seen me go through a layout design for this one. Here is the lower deck, here is the double deck. Yes, of course, it was a full double deck layout. This week I promised that I would talk about the structure for such an undertaking. Now, in most cases, double deck layouts are somewhat more difficult to build than single deckers, particularly in cases where some of the benchwork is too wide to simply cantilever from the wall on shelf brackets. And last week I promised that I would do another video where I talked about some of the structural considerations for a layout like this. I'm also going to talk a little bit about some areas that need special access consideration. Before we get into all of that, let's just go through the elevations so that you have a good idea of the amount of clearance that we have to deal with in various places. So let me find my elevation drawings. Now here is the top deck. All the bold numbers in the rectangles are track elevations, except where listed otherwise. The desk 29 inches, the top of his rolling cabinet 40, and the bottom of the AC unit 61.5 inches. Now on most double deck layouts, the top deck would be built significantly higher than this. But we have a problem here with the AC unit. The bottom of it is only 61.5 inches and it can't easily be moved. And even if we could move it, we wouldn't be able to move it very far because the headroom in the building is barely more than 6 feet. And also the customer for this layout is a few inches shorter than I am, and he prefers his benchwork a little bit lower. If I was building a double deck layout for me, the top deck would be at least 60 inches, probably 62-inch base elevation. Now we started off here with a 52-inch base elevation for the passenger terminal. Eventually we decided to raise that. So all the elevations on the entire layout are actually going to be built 2 inches more than the numbers that are specified. So there's the top deck. Here is the bottom deck. We can see that our base elevation here is 30 inches at this town. And apart from the staging yard, which drops down to 28, ignore the 30 there, that was an option. So apart from the staging yard, everything on this level is also higher than 30 inches. And if we go around the main line, we see that we are gradually spiraling up, and we come out of the bottom of the helix at 37 inches elevation. Here is the helix. It's only 2.5 laps because the helix starts 8 inches above the base for the lower deck and finishes 6 inches below the base for the upper deck. And that means that we have room for this intermediate staging level between the bottom of the helix and the lower staging. So this area in here is certainly going to be complicated to build. I will come back to that later. But also much of the benchwork around here is too wide for shelf brackets. So let's see how to do that as well. Let me find that drawing. Okay, what we are looking at now is the lower deck track plan with the upper deck framing superimposed on it. I haven't bothered to fill in this area here because these 8-inch shelves will just be a simple case of shelf brackets on both decks. At this end where it's tapered, we'll just build a triangular frame and support the wide end on section B, which is the green area. We have to start by attaching a piece to the wall that spans the window so that this corner is not floating in mid-air. And with the benchwork being a full 3 feet wide along this north wall, we need some supports nearer the front. And since we don't want legs right at the front getting in the way of viewing, I've suggested a series of threaded rods about a third of the way back in the scene. 1/4 inch or 5/16 rods are plenty strong enough to support the upper deck. And if they are painted flat black and hidden in clumps of tall conifers, they'll be virtually invisible, especially being back in the scene behind the front track where the trains passing in front of it will immediately steal your attention. Now, because of this small town scene in the middle, there's a gap of about 7 feet between 2 consecutive threaded rods, which is not a problem provided the benchwork is built properly. What you wouldn't want to do is build a section from the wall to the first rod and then another one to the second rod and then the third one, because then you've got 7 feet supported only at the ends. If this section is built up all the way from B1 to B4 with a single long framing member at the front, This section here and this section here add rigidity, and the two ends of this support are actually opposing cantilevers, meaning that the effective span is significantly less because of the stiffness at these two joints here. Moving around now to section C, we have a similar length span at the front, which cannot benefit from extending it both ends into cantilevers. However, we do have a backdrop away from the wall here, and the joists either side of the access opening behind it can be cantilevers in their own right, thus giving a little bit of extra support to the middle of this long front member. I drew C and D in the same colour because they'll both have to be built in situ after B and E are already installed. I'll come back to D. E is a relatively straightforward rectangular frame resting on a ledger board on the wall along the back and on posts behind the backdrop at E1 and E2. Again, the front unsupported span is about 7 feet, but provided this is a rigid point here, we do have the benefit of a cantilever at one end, and I'm suggesting that this beam be doubled up as well. For the other half of the red, section D, the front member is resting on the backdrop at both ends with conventional framing between them. These corners here will be filled in after the swing gate is installed. I'll come back to F because G will have to be built first. Now if we notice here, there is a curved backdrop running through the middle of this square. So the best way to support this is with a series of radial joists anchored to the wall here, resting on the backdrop, cantilevering the front of the benchwork. These three joists at this end will be tied together with the front member. These three joists will be tied together again at this end. And when the fascia goes in, it will be supported along these front members where it's straight. And then when it's curved, it will support the central joist and tie everything together. Now, although strips of 1/8 inch masonite are fairly flimsy when they're straight, as soon as you bend it into a fairly tight radius curve, it becomes immensely rigid and will finish the structure for this area. The same goes for everywhere else where the front of the benchwork is curved. The fascia becomes a very strong stiffener at all these points. We're getting back to the framing here. F is a fairly straightforward frame, firmly anchored to section G along this end and then resting on the lower level backdrop along the middle. It might be necessary to put a single threaded rod somewhere around here just for stability at this end. So that takes care of most of the upper deck. Now let's go on to those areas where the structure gets even more complicated. I mentioned last week that the backdrop through the swing gate is a structural member, allowing the whole section to be built as an I-beam. Let's find that now. Here's the drawings I did for this. This is the shape of the swing gate. Notice the front and back members are curved, so we can't make those from a single solid piece of lumber or a piece of 3/4 inch plywood. They'll have to be laminated from several sheets of much thinner plywood, firmly glued together between each layer. Now the front and back curves are different radii, so they need to be done separately. But since the top and bottom sections should line up, I recommended to the customer that he laminate these up at least twice as wide as he needs them, and then rip each one down the middle on a table saw. That'll make sure the top and bottom are exactly the same, and also it's half as much work. The cross members joining them are pretty straightforward. The only caveat there is that the ends do need to be cut accurately at the right angles, otherwise, as they are clamped and screwed together, it will distort the frame, and we can't afford that. Attached to each of the cross pieces, we have vertical stiffeners. I've shown those in light blue. And then the two halves of the backdrop get attached either side, holding the whole thing together. And then for horizontal rigidity, two solid tops. The bottom will have to be divided. You see the yellow pieces, and then the top will be solid. They don't need to be heavy-duty tops, either a single sheet of 1/8 inch plywood, or more likely sheets of pink foam glued all around, because all it has to do is stop it flexing in a horizontal direction. And then of course the hinges will be one on each deck, so they're plenty far enough apart to add rigidity in that location. And unlike the piano hinges that I have used for swing gates in the past, this will just be a pair of regular door hinges. because we don't want anything getting in the way of viewing. Here's the cross section. It shows all the various pieces in the same colour. And although I haven't shown them on the plan view, the fascia and the roadbed risers have been added into the section. So that's it for the swing gate. Now let's head over to the bottom corner of the layout with the complicated staging and helix levels. Now here is the low-level staging yard with the suggested framing drawn in. Now the framing is drawn in on top of the track bed for clarity. Obviously it needs to be built underneath it. And as we can see, it's fairly straightforward. 2 rectangular sections and 2 angled ones. Nothing complicated there. This section in red is where he's going to have to be able to get underneath the layout on his creeper to get inside for access. And since this is the lowest elevation on the layout, that needs to be built as shallow as possible. But since it's only a relatively short span, that shouldn't be an issue. Before I continue, let me bring up several other drawings side by side on the screen so that we can see everything together. Give me a second and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back again. Here are 3 successive layers side by side. It fits into the screen better this way and we can see everything together. Now on this lower level plan, you might notice that I haven't bothered about keeping the joists and legs away from switch machine locations. That's because this benchwork is already a little on the low side. The customer doesn't want to be doing maintenance underneath the layout. So all the switch machines will be top mounted in a row along the back. So that means that the framework underneath can just go wherever it needs to, without having to worry about turnout locations above it. Now the intermediate staging yard, we see it here in the right hand drawing, has 5 tracks all the way around the outside, directly above the back 5 tracks of this yard. And the yard ladder is directly over this one. Now since there's only about 6 inches of clearance between the 2 levels here, there's not going to be a lot of space to get in under this framing to maintain turnouts here. So I'm recommending that this section here be removable for those occasions where you need to access these turnouts for maintenance. It'll be a simple matter just to leave it detachable with 4 screws and sliding rail joiners at the ends. So for the middle staging yard, this end is fairly conventionally framed, and then the rest of it can be on a series of radial bridge piers, very similar to what you see on highway overpasses throughout the country. A pair of threaded rods front and back with a piece of wood between them, probably about a 1x2 section, so an actual 3/4 by 1.5 is more than necessary because we're only looking at about a 20-inch span. And then once the plywood for the next deck is laid on top of it, really isn't a lot of room for longitudinal stiffeners under the track bed, but that's not a problem because in all areas like this it is normal to add masonite fences along both sides of the track so that any derailed trains don't fall to the floor. Well, if we upgrade these fences and laminate them out of 3 or 4 pieces of 1/8-inch plywood instead, all glued together, that will become an immensely strong beam, which does double duty as the longitudinal structure for all the various benchwork levels. Now moving up to the helix, this can now sit on a second layer of these radial supports using the same threaded rods as we used to support the intermediate staging level. And then once the lower lap of the helix is stiffened up with the structural fences, supports can be added for each successive level wherever they're convenient. They don't have to be directly above the lower ones. Once the customer has got this far with the structure, he's pretty much home and dry. If we look at now at the 4th level, here we see the top lap of the helix and the hidden upper level main line that snakes its way around behind it and under the top level of staging. At this stage, it's just a case of copying what we had already done below it. And then the top level staging looks exactly like this one, although it will again be supported on another tier of the radial supports. So these threaded rods need to be left long to go all the way to the top instead of trimmed off too early. So although this area taken as a whole is indeed very complicated to build, it's not that difficult if it's broken down into a series of steps like this. So I think that covers all the structural considerations for this layout. And I think many of these tricks will be useful on various other layouts as well. So I hope that someone will find some use out of at least parts of this video. Before signing off, I did say I would talk about making the layout accessible. So let's shut all these down and find the next drawing. Okay, let's start with the lower deck. There's an area here which may look as though this track is not accessible. But I did take the precaution of moving the backdrop a full 4 inches away from the wall, twice as much as is theoretically necessary for a single track, because that 4 inches is wide enough to reach in with one's arm. And since it's not very long, we can reach in halfway from each end. It's also lower than this track in front of it and significantly lower than the scenery. So if the benchwork is designed properly in this area, it should even be possible to reach in underneath if you need to. The customer did point that out to me. He was a little bit concerned about accessibility there. And also on the approaches to the lower level staging yard, there's a curved turnout just inside this tunnel and before it crosses under the track here. So there'll need to be a chunk of removable scenery, probably including the tunnel portal, to access that turnout for maintenance. And I've already mentioned making this end of the intermediate staging removable for ease of accessibility for the lower level turnouts. All those on this side are all out in the open and therefore easily reachable. And then there's one area on the upper deck that needs special attention. This junction here, because of the geometry of the two turnouts and the diamond crossing, I wasn't able to move it further around the curve. So it has to be up against the wall, which means that part of this junction is under the high level staging, which is only 6 inches higher up. So my recommendation here is to have a section about 2 feet long at the back, just encompassing the back 3 or 4 tracks that can be detached, again with sliding rail joints and screws, so that that can be taken out if you do ever need to adjust or replace those turnouts underneath it. Other than that, every part of the layout is easily accessible. Remember, we have an access opening here. It's just shown covered in buildings. That's plenty large enough. All he has to do is roll under the layout on his creeper to access the diesel shop, the roundhouse and turntable. Every other part of it is well within arm's reach from the front. Well, anyway, I think this is the first time I've ever split a layout design into 2 videos. I hope it was worth doing it. Hope my viewers found value from both installments. Next week I will be doing something different. So until then, I will sign off and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching and bye for now.